So I, first of all, want to say I'm humbled to be here. I'm glad to see so many young people out tonight. I didn't know exactly what to expect. And I also, I love black people deeply. And I feel a little bit out of place because I don't know the language of Freemasonry and of course, the details of the history. The first time I ever heard of Jubilo and Jubilum, I think it was at the Million Man March when Farrakhan, probably to your dissatisfaction, brought it up to everybody and didn't explain it in any details. So I was walking around talking, who was hiring and what is Jubilo and Jubilum? So I'm just as ignorant 20 years later as I was when he first said it. But I know you know it, and I do know a little bit about Prince Hall. Somebody was walking around with a t-shirt on, and as soon as I saw it, I just said to him, I said, is that Prince Hall? And he said, yes. And because a lot of my work, especially around black nationalism, a lot of the foundation of it is grounded in David Walker and his appeal, which is also in the same location as Prince Hall. Walker comes along, some 20 years later. He was born in 1785, so Prince Hall dies in 1807. They may have eclipsed toward the very end, but Prince Hall was certainly the influence on David Walker and his consciousness. And the tragedy is that David Walker has been lost to our children as an important figure. He was kind of a Malcolm X figure for his time. He wrote The Appeal in 1829, 1830 that called for general insurrection and rising up. So very early, Prince Hall becomes the foundation, in fact, of the black freedom struggle itself. Let me clarify what I'm saying. What Gaylord Wilmore says in his book, Black Religion and Black Radicalism, is that the creation of the black church, particularly the AME Church in Philadelphia, in the same year and same time that the framers of the U.S. Constitution were meeting in the same city at the same months, in the summer of 1787, the AME Church was born in Philadelphia, at the same place at the same time America was born. And Gaylord Wilmore argues that the creation of the AME Church was the beginning of the black freedom struggle. And if the earliest lodges under the leadership of Prince Hall predates that, then you would have to actually argue that the creation of the first hall is the beginning, or the break with the white Masons, if you will, is the beginning of the black freedom struggle. In other words, whatever else we do after in terms of King and the Harlem Renaissance and Garveyism and the different movements that we generate in our pursuit of freedom, the kernel, the foundation goes back to the early efforts of Prince Hall. I understand that clearly, that you can draw a line from Prince Hall to David Walker, from David Walker through the modern black freedom struggle, all the way through the modern movements of the black group in America, all the way through where we are today. So there's an important history and knowledge that you sit on, that you keep, that is sacred, not only for you as a community, but for the black community that is not Masonic, because it's a part of it's an extension of who they are too. I like to talk about Vincent Harding. I don't know if any of you know his work, but he passed a couple of years ago. He was one of King's major lieutenants that helped King write the Vietnam speech. But Vincent Harding was a professor at Spelman, and he wrote a book called There Is a River. Anybody ever read that book? One of the best books you can read in your life as a black person. If you have no knowledge of your history, if your children are ignorant, just give them that book, There Is a River. He wanted to write it all the way up from the Atlantic slave trade all the way through the civil rights movement, but he stopped at the abolition, at the Civil War, so he didn't cover the next 100 years. I guess he wants somebody else to do that. But what he tried to do was outline and use the river as a metaphor for the black freedom struggle, that we all are part of the river, that Prince Hall, that Barack Obama, that Mary Shad Carey, that Ella Baker, Tom Bradley, Willie Brown, Huey Newton, Martin Luther King, none of them are more important than the river itself. The river itself is our people and our struggle and our history from Africa to where we are at this very moment. And when all of us come and go, we might represent a little drop at best in the river, but the river's going to flow until we get our freedom. Amen. It's going to flow. And the tragedy is too much of what's flowed is our blood. And we have to do that. And what Hayden is addressing is definitely something I think Black Lives Matter should be engaged in, is instead of talking to the white world and media, Black Lives Matter originally was a conversation of black folk, and I think Black Lives Matter should maintain itself as a conversation of black folk and cut out the need to draw attention to themselves in terms of national media. And do what the Panthers did successfully in the community that J. Edgar Hoover thought was the real threat, not the guns and the dashikis and the afros and the leather. I'm sure some of you all remember this history. But the real revolution that threatened America was the programs, the education, the feeding of the people, the testing of sickle cell anemia, the transformation of young men and women's lives. That's what Black Power really was about. And if Black Lives Matter doesn't want to make the same mistake that the Panthers did, where Huey himself said that when they began to critique black institutions for not being as enlightened as those young leaders were, they themselves defected the black community. And I'm afraid Black Lives Matter, if it doesn't understand and meet the community where it is, as opposed to the arrogance of where they think it ought to be, they will themselves defect the black community. If you're only talking to represent one part of the community because it reflects your identity, desires, and struggles, and you're leaving out the rest of the black community, you can preach Black Lives Matter all you want. It's going to last for a very short time. That window will close so quick, not because white people rejected you, but because the black community said you don't adequately represent us in a full scale. You're representing a very narrow agenda for you and your little group of people who've gotten popular. Meanwhile, the masses of black people continue to struggle and trying to figure out how to get out of this situation where they walk outside and their lives are in peril and in danger, and you on TV getting popular. So I think it's really important for Black Lives Matter to turn back to the black community. And I say that, because I think in these times, institutions like the Masonic Hall, these are reliable institutions. Someone just said I think Hayden said it makes good men better men. And we need that kind of commitment at the local level. I'm not here to talk about black history as a record. I'm here to say to you that you are a part of it. You're a part of that river. You're a part of that flow. And you and I must make our contributions while we have time and while we have an opportunity to. Amen. To make a mark. And don't be so arrogant to think you got to see the results in your lifetime. Right. You know what I mean? A lot of times we want to see, like King told the people, we as a people will get to the promised land. Some people are too arrogant to feel like because they don't see the change that it's not going to come. That's your ego. That's you making it about you. But for me, it's more about each of us doing our part to push the rock or push whatever the obstacle is that stands between us and our goals as individuals, as families, as men, and as young people. Anything that gets in your way, you got to move it. And I think as a people, we are. I said this to my class. I teach a class over at Berkeley, and I teach a class at San Francisco. And I told my class at San Francisco yesterday, and they looked at me funny when I told most of them who are non-white, but none of them, it was like one or two black students. I told them, I said, it's amazing to me, given the leadership that black Americans have offered this country for 150 years of struggle, knocking down barriers for everybody else, so that even when in 1965, when you come here in 1965 after we've knocked down all the barriers. If you're South Indian, if you're South Asian, like Indian, Pakistani, Arab, Muslims, you come to America in 1965 because black America knocked the doors down that you were able to walk through. And the tragedy I see in our life is that too many people are quick to sign on to hating black folk as a way, an entry, a fast track to getting success. Whole ethnic groups in America, like the Irish, like Jews, I'm not being anti-Semitic, like Poles, like the Italians, all of those white ethnics have seen us here for 200 years before they even got here. And as soon as they got here, they come stepping over us with the N-word on their tongue to say they are Americans. Our ancestors were here since 1503 at the very least. So 100, your children need to understand this. that we were here for 115 years before the first one of us was put in chains in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. That for a century black people were free in America, the continent. They came with Cortez. They even came with Columbus. And they were here free, not slaves. And if you begin your history with slavery, then everything else, John Henrik Clarke said, will seem like progress. Now, our history did not begin with slavery. Our history began with black exploration and black greatness. You can look at, they're trying to figure out how the Olmec busts end up in Mexico. These things are made out of stone that doesn't even come from this continent. The brothers, the big old busts look like brothers from Compton. You know, not Lagos, but Compton. And y'all know what I'm talking about, those Olmec busts, the giant busts? They had them over here at the Young last year or 2 years ago for us to see. These are undeniable proofs that Ivan Van Sertima's research that came before Columbus shows that there was a black presence here on this continent before slavery. And our children have got to understand that. And that's the real horror of our times, is black Americans are, and I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say this, but when you look at our history, what our people have been through, and you look at how through all of this struggle, for me, and I'm just not really getting this as an adult, we are an amazing people. The tragedy is everybody knows it except us. We are a world historical people, meaning we are a descendants of a world historical people who had their own continent known as Africa. Right? The European is a world historical people. The native people here in the Americas were a world historical people who lived in the Ohlone, for example, lived here in Northern California for 3,000 years from the time of the Romans until 1787 in peace, no rape, no murder, no pillaging, no taking of lands. And they got you and me convinced that this is the only way it could have gone down. No. It could have gone down differently. It could have gone down the way the Ohlone related to each other here in Northern California. Look it up. There's a book called Murder State. It talks about how Serenus Hastings from Hastings University is a Hitler in the Bay Area for wiping out the Native American, the Ohlone. He got all his wealth to create that school from taking the Native Americans' land and wiping them off the face of the earth. Look up Hastings' history. He committed genocide from 1849 to about 1876. I have the book actually over in my bag. I won't get, because I get so excited. I'll be running over there to get the book and forget why I got the book. But let me just show you real quick, because I think it's important for us to understand. It's important for us to understand that, here it is. Look here. This book, Murder State. California's Native American Genocide, 1846 to 1873. This documents Hastings' work and how he wiped out the Native American people and how they lived here for 3,000, not 300, 3,000, 3 millennia in peace. You heard of Ohlone College? Yeah. Find out who those people are, and you'll see that the European is a particular thing. Because I had the beautiful experience of being a keynote speaker in Australia for the Aboriginal conference, and they studied the Black Panther Party in the 60s, so they wanted to understand the Panthers and the Panthers' relationship to the Maori in New Zealand and the Aborigine in Australia. They actually took up Black Power in the 60s. And they looked at this. And one of the things I found out by reading a book called Fatal Shores, which is a book about this thick that you should read about Australia's history, it tells a story of how the Australian indigenous people to this day identify themselves as black. That they see themselves as contiguous Africans, that when Africa drifted and Australia drifted from Africa, they simply stayed on the land and drifted with it, but they see themselves as a contiguous, meaning continuous, 60,000 year civilization uninterrupted, until the white man comes, the same year this country is born, the same year that they create the U.S. Constitution, the same year the Spanish end up over here in California, at 1776, that same year that this country is born, the British take a bunch of Irish criminals, and they called it the convict tree. That's what they called it. A convict tree. They didn't even send like Lewis and Clark here, where they sent these investigators to study the land and the topography and the foodstuffs and the animals and said, hey, this stuff is safe or it's not safe. No, they wanted to get rid of these criminals so bad in Australia, they just dropped them off on, like they sent them all on a taxi and just dropped them off at the water and said, go. And they came and just immediately, as soon as those whites arrived, they erased 2 centuries of free, peaceful trade between a group called the Macassans of Indonesia. They're an indigenous group to Indonesia. And the Aborigine, who still call themselves black, because they see themselves as Africans who stayed on the land when it left. And they were a contiguous 60,000 year civilization. 60,000 years. The European comes in 1787 and it's all erased immediately overnight. But when I was a kid, I got taught that what has happened to the Native Americans was inevitable. It's progress. Do you understand that Booker T. Washington's ideas of whites and blacks being as united as the 5 fingers in terms of human progress and as separate as the 5 fingers in terms of personal relationships, belonging to clubs like this or lodges or volunteer associations, clubs? Booker Washington separated it. He believed in that kind of separation. And the reason is because Booker Washington, what many of the black power radicals fail to recognize is that Booker Washington was deeply informed by the erasure of the indigenous people here on this land. So when he's talking about trying to figure out a way up from slavery, he understands that these people ain't playing with nobody. Right. They have wiped out the indigenous people. What you think they're worried about you for? They done wiped out 30 million people in a few years. What they care about you?
There you go. That's it. There you go. That's it.
And the beauty is that through all of this erasure, all of this killing, all of these genocides, all of this taking and killing, the black group is stronger now. I'm not saying in our economic position, but what I'm about to tell you is a mind-blowing thing. People keep saying that black people are going through genocide because these cops keep shooting people. Let me tell you something. In 2010, there were 4 million marriages between black people. There was 150,000 black to white marriages in 2010. Do the math. 4 million marriages black to black. 150,000 white to black. See, we are together. They got us thinking we're not. And the problem with that math right there is a lot of brothers and sisters aren't getting married at all. Those are the people that are getting married. The larger problem is that they aren't getting married at all. There are more black people in college than there are anybody at all, everybody combined in prison. But we get told there are more black young men in prison than there are in college. No, they're trying to mess with your head. They're trying to get in your brain for you to think that you are less than what you are. I'm telling you, there are 4 million black people in college. There are 2 million people in prison. Not black people, people. There's 1 million black people in prison, and that's sick to me because that's half and that's way too much. But when you look at the numbers, 4 million black boys and girls, young people in university, 1 million in trouble. And they got us thinking it's 4 million in trouble and 1 million getting college education. So I think it's so important that you go out of your way, parents and grandparents. Stop this tendency to try to be nice, to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? To give kids the truth with sugar. Thank you, sugar-coated. Tell them the truth. Yeah. Tell them about their ancestors, the ones you know and don't know. Tell them about the famous ones. Tell them about the ones on these walls. Tell them about everybody you can tell them about. Because the more they know about who they are, the better they're going to be academically as students. Do you understand this? If you are a young person that has no interest in your people, there's a direct correspondence to your grades.
Yeah.
That's not a law, that's a pattern. Not a rule, but a pattern. There's actual research that shows that those young people who have a healthy sense of self and culture, who they are, those kids tend to be the best academically. Again, American Jews. Right now, today, what, Friday? We're here. Guess what Jews all over this country are doing right now? All of them. All the observant Jews are having dinner together. All their families are meeting together right now. Grandmama and grandpapa's there. Daddy's there. Aunties and cousins are there. They got some Manischewitz wine. They got some matzah bread. Y'all go to church on Sunday, don't you? They sit there and then they read the Torah. They pray. They say a little prayer. They put the prayer books away. Then, and this is, they start the food. They bring one round of food. They pray for it. They eat it. They bring another round of food. They pray for it. They eat it. They bring about 5 rounds of food every Friday night for a lifetime. And you want to understand why Jews are 3 to 6% of this nation's population, but are overrepresented as lawyers, dominate Hollywood and accounting, and are overrepresented in the professions? You know why? Because every Friday they got to see their ancestors. Every Friday they got to see grandpa. Right. Every Friday they got to see grandma and auntie. And if you got to see your ancestors every weekend, you're not going to be on nobody's pole. You're not going to be sagging. Right. You're not going to be proud to fail. If you know you got to face your ancestors every Friday, or your history, or your people every Friday and Saturday, you're going to be a different person and a better person, a more productive person. Yeah. And I think there's a direct correspondence to the overrepresentation of Jews in America in the professions and their sense of who they are as a people. They believe in integration. They supported us in our integrationist movement. The best friends black folk had from 1905 until 1965 was American Jews, until Black Power kicked them out. But they supported us going into integration, but they themselves don't want to integrate. Right. They got you talking about we shall overcome. Go ahead, Negroes, get on up there. Meanwhile, they're back there. Let's have Shabbat, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Do you see my point? That culture and grounding and foundations have a direct impact on your child's self-esteem. You want to talk about these doll studies that were done at the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education test? These Kenneth and Mamie Clark doll studies, that Kenneth and Mamie Clark renounced themselves, Derek Bell renounced it. Everybody renounced the studies because they weren't scientific. They got a bunch of little ugly dolls and gave them to black kids. Knowing there wasn't wasn't nobody trying to make nothing pretty black in the 60s. Wasn't nobody trying to make no doll pretty in the 50s. A black doll in the 50s was just not pretty. And I doubt that Raggedy Ann and the white doll were looking any better. But my point is, as an experiment, these people give black kids dolls that are ugly, and then they give them white dolls that are normal, and ask the black kids, how you feel about these dolls? And then extrapolate from these kids looking at dolls and saying, ooh, that's how they feel about themselves. Well, that can only happen if a people's history is erased from them and they have no sense of who they are as a people. But what if they took any of you young people over here, or all you young people, and sat you down in a room with their fancy work and their fancy words and their fancy studies, and they hand you a doll of Oprah and a doll of Beyonce and a doll of Michelle Obama, and then gave you Raggedy Ann and any white doll, give you any white doll in America. Find the finest white doll they can come up with. I guarantee you our black children are not picking over Michelle, Beyonce, and Oprah. You understand me? That's all they needed to do in 1954 was get an Oprah doll. Because if the young people know who they are and where they come from, you don't have to, and it's so important that you do it within the first 2 years of their lives. That foundation, that window, the first 2, maybe up to the first 4. But those first years are so critical that you have to talk to them. You have to tell them who they are. And I think there's somewhere in the Bible where Paul says, I planted, Apollos gave the water, but God gave the increase. We owe it to our young people to plant and to water and let God give the increase. Part of the problem of our people is they don't know who they are. The so-called N-word. That word is perfect because it says you don't belong to anywhere or anybody. And it really signals our predicament, historically speaking. So it's so important, I think, to lay down foundations. Get books if you get books for your young people. Let them read. My kids, I have 3 kids, a 10-year-old boy, an 8-year-old boy, and a 5-year-old girl. They can't watch anything in my house that doesn't have them on it. If it's on TV, somebody non-white has got to be on that program. If you want to play with Punky, what is this? I don't know. I don't even know who's popular anymore. You want to play with whoever's on Disneyland, then then you got to have Doc McStuffins. You know, if you want to have this, you want to have little what's her name, Elsa. What's Elsa? You get in trouble talking about Elsa to these kids. Elsa, what was that? Her show, Frozen. Was it Frozen? Right? What's her song? Right? Let it go. Let it go. I tell my daughter, like, no. If you don't see a black girl around, if Elsa ain't got no black female friends, we're not watching Elsa. Because people, we tried the nice way as black folk and as Christian. We have tried as Muslims. We've tried as Masons to reach out the olive branch for centuries, and we've even been willing to cut off our own arm to make peace with other people. Martin Luther King literally believed that as they kill us, we should forgive them. That's what he believed, that even as you die, as your life is leaving you, you must forgive the murderer. That's the kind of stuff that we've done. And I think the time has come for black Americans as a people to stop focusing outward and turn back inward to community. If we don't do it, then they deserve to shoot all of us. Let them shoot us in the streets. Let the cops shoot us. Let Zimmerman shoot us. Let the vigilantes shoot us. Let Dylan Roof take us out in church on Sunday morning. Because if we don't respond to this crisis we're in a concerted way as a people, then we deserve every bullet they give us. We deserve every pain we get if we don't, as a people, use this institution and other institutions to mobilize in unprecedented ways. The doors have been closed. They have told you before the laws of America, you have no standing. The juries of anonymous white people today are saying to you the same thing that Judge Taney said in the Dred Scott case in 1857, that a black man has no rights that a white man should have to respect. So if that's how they feel about you, then educate yourselves, young people, with a chip on your shoulder. That's what I did. My mother is 90 years old, lives in the projects where we lived for the past 45 years in New York. My brothers and sisters, I have 2 brothers that can't vote because they have felonies. I have a brother and a sister in the grave. We are in a predicament as a people, and I think it's so important that we use this moment to talk to each other. As families, as fathers, as men, as sons, as wives, as daughters, as sisters. No, we're not all going to be A students in this room, and we're not all going to be great at what we try to do. But you have to keep in mind, and I'm done with this, that you come from such a deep and rich people. You are foolish. You are foolish to abdicate that or give that up trying to be somebody else when they're busy trying to be you. They don't know what to do with Beyonce. They thought she was one of them until she came out with Malcolm X on them last week. Right? That's that old trickster stuff we used to play with Uncle Remus, where they thinking we shucking and jiving. Meanwhile, we stabbing and stabbing. Yowza, boss, yowza. So I think as a people, you have to find ways. I think what's important is we need enlightened leadership in these times. I don't mean charismatic leadership. I don't mean more messiahs. I mean people like you who are willing to take institutions like this and use it to the advantage of the community, even if it's just the young people who are the descendants of you all who are working here, and build them up like Hayden said. My first job is to be a man every morning for my children and a father for my children. That's my task. That's my ministry. That's my social movement, is making sure my sons grow up to be men and my daughter grows up to be a young woman.
Right.
And everything else that comes after that is, is extra. And so I pray that you all will be inspired tonight. I pray that you young people have heard something I said. You will probably never see me again, unless you look on Channel 2 next week, Channel 4, Channel 5 next week. But aside from that, you'll probably never see me again. And I wanted to say to you, as a young person, don't wait for older people to come to you to tell you to seek your information. Go online, open a book, educate yourself. When I was young, I was headed for prison, because that's the only chance we had, the only course we had. I went to a Scared Straight program. They took us to Fishkill Prison in New York, and that's when I knew my life was going to change for good. I went to one Scared Straight program, and I've been right ever since, because I was scared of prison. I'm still I got post-traumatic prison disorder, because I was traumatized my whole young life of not going to jail because everybody else did. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody else did. And I had to speak in front of 300 cops about 2 weeks ago over at San Francisco. And I pointed my finger in the cops' face, all 300 of them. I hope none of you are here right now. But I was so nervous because I didn't know how to say what I wanted to say to them and also be true to our history. And so I sat there and I told them, I said, we're not scared of you. I said, we've been doing this for 500 years. I said, y'all only been around for 300. I said, I'm not scared of you. And I told them, I said that black people will win in the long run, no matter what you do. And I think that's going to happen because we turn to ourselves. And we have to look at other minority populations like the Indians in this country, how Jews operate in this country. We got a perfect example over in Chinatown in San Francisco and right here in Oakland, how we don't have to preach. That's been our problem. We're too busy preaching our black power, too busy preaching our nationalism. Shut up about it, do it quietly, and rebuild your communities. Thank you so much.